In the annals of Egyptian history, there is no one quite like Ramesses II. He is arguably the most famous, or infamous, of Egypt's pharaohs. Tutankhamun and Cleopatra challenge him for that title, but where Ramesses wins in the fame department is his visibility. The monuments of this king appear throughout Egypt and Sudan, and his art, like statues, can be found in countless museums. It's a rare collection that doesn't have something of Ramesses II. By comparison, Cleopatra and Tutankhamun are more famous in the imaginative sense. Their stories are legendary, but visit a museum, or Egypt itself, and you'll find these two monarchs are almost invisible compared to Ramesses. There are a couple of reasons for this. The first is longevity. Ramesses came to power around 20 years old, and he ruled Egypt for 67 years, dying in his late 80s. By any metric, that was an incredible tenure of rule. Multiple generations would be born, live, and die under the reign of this monarch. Such a long period gave the king more opportunities than most to build monuments, lead expeditions, and enact political or religious policies that shaped his society and left a lasting legacy. The other reason for Ramesses' fame is stone, building. Ramesses was one heck of a builder pharaoh. His government and his people worked constantly throughout his long reign. They erected monuments throughout the Nile Valley. Some of these were new, others were additions to existing temples, and some were borrowed from previous works. We'll get into that as our story unfolds. The point is, if you visit Egypt today, pretty much every necropolis or monument has some trace of Ramesses II and the achievements of his people. Finally, Ramesses' fame is so great because it's not a new phenomenon. Not long after his death, Egyptians started looking back at him as a kind of poster child for pharaonic power and splendor. And just a few decades after his passing, a new lineage of rulers started calling themselves Ramesses, hoping to reflect some of his luster upon their reigns. Today, we meet Ramesses II. Eventually, we'll be talking about Ramesses III, IV, V, all the way to Ramesses XI. That is a record among the Egyptian rulers. We have 4 Amenhoteps, 4 Thutmoses, and 3 Senuserets. And if you include the intermediate periods, with their forgotten minor kings, we have 7 Intefs, 7 Amenemhats, and 6 Sobek-hoteps. But Ramesses? That is a name beyond all others, one that will live for a long, long time. This fame has given the king a certain glamour, and today he is often called Ramesses the Great. That is a modern title. It doesn't appear in the ancient records, although he did call himself Great of Strength, Great of Victories, and similar epithets. But the name has stuck, and you'll find it used for exhibitions, documentaries, and books. The idea of Ramesses the Great is a big deal in the popular vision of ancient Egypt. Does the man himself deserve that reputation? Well, we'll find out as we explore this tale. But whatever your expectations, I can guarantee there is a lot more to Ramesses than you might expect. So, let's meet our new pharaoh. King Seti I died in June of 1292 BCE, approximately. The next day, Ramesses officially became king. We know the date of this event thanks to a festival that was celebrated in years to come. Every year, the people of Deir el-Medina, the village of the tomb builders, would observe an annual holiday for the appearance, or high, of King Ramesses II. That festival occurred every year in the 3rd month of Shemu, the harvest season, on day 27. That gives us a likely date for Ramesses' accession. The king came to power in the high summer. The transition from his predecessor, Seti I, would last a few months. Officially, Ramesses had the power and authority of king the day after the death of his father. But there were 3 important things to do before his accession was truly complete. First, Ramesses would need to choose and then announce his names, his identity as a living Horus. Then, he would need to perform the funeral rites for his father, Seti the Osiris. Finally, Ramesses would go before the gods in various temples to symbolically receive his crowns and their divine blessings. Such blessings were assured, of course, but it did mean that the first few months of the reign were defined by the end of one period and the preparation of the next. The exact order of these events is a matter of debate, and different historians will give you different versions depending on which evidence they think is most important. What I'm about to present is one possible reconstruction, but it's not definitive by any means. First things first, Ramesses needed an identity, a set of names specific to him that indicated his royal persona, his agenda as a ruler of all Egypt. He did so in a grandiose fashion. By 1292 BCE, Egyptian kings had 5 names in total. Today, I'm going to focus on 2 of them and cover the rest in future. The name Ramesses means born of Ra, or born of the sun god specifically. The name does have different spellings. Usually it is Ramesses, but sometimes it appears as Ramesses II. There is no consistency to this, although the second version, Ramesses II, seems to be an older, more classical version of the name. If Ramesses had lived a few centuries earlier, we might talk about Ramesses II. But around 1292, the Egyptian language had evolved enough that the name was spelled differently in the classical and modern writing. It's a whole linguistic thing, I won't get into it right here. But long story short, if you visit the king's monuments, you will often find his name spelled as Ramesses II, which, in the words of Johnny Cash, might make him a king named Sue. So the name is written Ramesses. How about pronunciation? Well, that's a bit trickier. Ancient Egyptian still has a lot of gaps in that regard. But we do have a clue thanks to Ramesses' diplomacy. Throughout his reign, the pharaoh communicated constantly with rulers in different lands, and messages from these rulers, like the king of the Hittites, survive to this day. These letters are usually written in Akkadian cuneiform, the international language of the time, but they address Ramesses directly by name. These foreign translations reveal some of the nuances of the pronunciation. In the diplomatic writing, the name, which in hieroglyphs is Ramesses, comes across more like Ramessesa. There might be some translation in there, but the cuneiform usually has a stronger sense of the vowels than Egyptian hieroglyphs. So if we imagine the king as Ramessesa, we might be close to the truth. The king also added epithets to his personal name. There are many of these, but the most common one is a figure of the god Amun, along with a wooden hoe, the farming tool. This reads as Ramesses Mer Amun, or Ramesses, beloved of Amun. The phrase was probably pronounced Miyamen, or, again from the diplomatic messages, Mayamana. That is the most common variation, so if you are visiting his monuments, look for the figure of Amun alongside that of Ra. When you find those glyphs, you are usually looking at Ramesses Miyamun, or Ramessesa Mayamana. Anyway, choosing the personal name was easy enough. But what about the royal one? That needed to be special, a way to separate Ramesses from his grandfather, Ramesses I, and any later kings who might use the same moniker. What did Ramesses call himself as a pharaoh? As the king of southern and northern Egypt, Ramesses named himself Usir Ma'at Ra. There are 3 parts to this. Usir, meaning powerful, Ma'at, meaning order or truth, and Ra, meaning the sun god. So the name breaks down as the order of Ra, or the truth of Ra, is powerful. The name is quite similar to that of his father Seti, who called himself Men Ma'at Ra, or Ra's order is established. Apparently, there was a father-son emphasis on the Ma'at of Ra. The focus on Ra is typical. Most royal names honor the creator god. But Seti and Ramesses also emphasize the cosmic order, Ma'at, which was the foundation of reality. Maybe that gives an insight to their philosophies, the core of their religious identity. Either way, a name like Usir Ma'at Ra was a strong name for a newly appearing king. If you are familiar with Ramesses II, you might be expecting another part to that name. On many monuments, the king is called Usir Ma'at Ra Setep En Ra, which translates as Ra's order is powerful, the one whom Ra chose, or chosen by Ra. That name will become part of the king's identity, but not at the start. In the first year of his reign, he simply called himself Usir Ma'at Ra, and he added the Setep En Ra in a later year. Specifically, he added that in regnal year 2. That is really helpful for historians. If a text has the name Usir Ma'at Ra by itself, then it belongs specifically to the first year of his reign. That's really useful for someone like me, trying to reconstruct his tale. There are other names that make up Ramesses' titulary, but I'll introduce them another time. For now, it's enough to know the personal name, Ramesses beloved of Amun, and the throne name, Usir Ma'at Ra, Ra's order is powerful. These give the agenda, the identity of the new king, and they mark a starting point for his reign. Now, enough introductions. Let's embark on the reign. After the break, Ramesses manages the transition from his father's rule to his own. He leads the funeral of Seti I, taking the Osiris to his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Then he travels to Karnak, among other temples, to appear before the gods and receive their blessings and confirmation of his rule. We have a lot of information about these events, thanks to Ramesses' own monuments. We will explore those after the break. See you in a moment. In June of 1292 BCE, Seti I died and Ramesses inherited the authority of a ruler. He chose his names and established his identity as Usir Ma'at Ra, Ramesses, beloved of Amun. With that, he was established as the new Horus. But the succession of an Egyptian king required a bit more before it was complete in a religious sense. First, as Horus, Ramesses would need to do something important for his father, the Osiris Seti. He needed to bury him. The funeral of Seti I took place around August, about 2 months after his death. It was the first month of Akhet, the flood season, a terribly hot time of year, and the procession must have baked in the sun, bearing down upon the desert hills. Hardly ideal, but that was the situation. The mourning party walked a path west of the Nile. They had departed Seti's memorial temple and now headed towards the Valley of the Kings. It was a long walk through the hills and canyons that line the western escarpment. Their journey would take them far from the world of the living and into the paths of the dead. In the midst of this party, the king's coffin lay atop a sled designed to look like a shrine. Hauled by porters, dragging it along the road, the coffin jostled and bounced upon the stony path. Inside, Men Ma'at Ra, Seti, lay embalmed and wrapped, encased in gold and gems. The party was full of courtiers, priests, musicians, mourners, and soldiers. At the head of that group, Ramesses led the way in the guise of a pious son. Based on art, he probably wore a specific costume, a leopard skin draped over his shoulders and around his torso, a long kilt down to the ankles, with an apron or sporan decorated with cobras, the Uraeus serpent. On his chin, Ramesses wore a short beard, like a goatee. He probably started growing that as soon as Seti died. For his headpiece, the king wore a special wig, with a thick braid or sidelock down one side of the head. This costume was that of Horus Iyun Mutef, Horus the pillar of his mother. It is a religious symbol, a kind of avatar for the concept of renewal and transition. The Iyun Mutef is a complicated idea, I won't get into it right now, but it often shows up in royal tombs and temples, in scenes dealing with transition, funerals, offerings to ancestors, that kind of idea. The image of Horus Iyun Mutef, Horus the pillar of his mother, turns up in the tomb of Seti I and the monument of Nefertari, and Ramesses himself appears dressed as the Iyun Mutef when he makes offerings to the image and memory of his father. So it is a fair bet that Ramesses wore the costume of this being, the long kilt, the leopard skin, the short beard, and the thick braid or sidelock, which gives us a strong mental image for the event. Ramesses led his father's coffin and body to the Valley of the Kings and brought him to the door of his tomb. Here, the pharaoh would have led important prayers and rites, most notably the opening of the mouth, the Wep-Er, a set of 75 prayers and actions that symbolically awakened Seti in the next world. Despite its name, the opening of the mouth also affected the eyes, ears, and nose of the deceased, allowing them to see, hear, breathe, speak, eat, and drink. Touching sacred tools to the coffin, the mummy, and the statues of Seti, Ramesses would enable his father to live once more. With all of that done, the porters carried Seti's coffin down into the tomb, down the stairs, along the passages, through the myriad chambers, all the way to the burial hall, the Per Nebu, the House of Gold, or the Weskhet Neti Cheteptu Emim, the hall in which one rests. They laid Seti's coffin into its sarcophagus, a beautiful casket made of travertine or alabaster. These were purified with water, anointed with oils, and the priests poured resin over the coffin to preserve it. Then, one by one, they closed the lids. Around them, the statues, shabtis, furniture, and treasures of Seti glittered in the flickering light of candles and lamps. The air was thick with incense and perfume. Breathing deep in the airless depths of the tomb, the participants' heads must have whirled. With the coffins in place, carpenters erected shrines, several of them made of wood and gold, nestled one inside the other. As each shrine was closed, the priests locked them with a cord and a seal made of mud. When that was done, the priests and Ramesses uttered some final prayers and then withdrew. They made their way back up the corridors, past the trinkets and treasures. At last, they emerged from the darkness into the brilliant day. The sunlight must have been dazzling, the fresh air a relief after the closed and darkened tomb. With everyone out, labourers closed the entrance, sealed the doorway, and began to fill the staircase. Basket loads of rock, sand, and mud would cover the opening to Seti's monument. Eventually, the hole was entirely buried. The tomb disappeared from view. The funeral was done. The burial party turned around and began its slow journey back out of the valley. Ramesses followed, perhaps leading the way, or perhaps at the rear, leaving last to ensure his father's security. Retreading their steps, the party made their way along the rocky paths, through the desert hills, back towards the Nile, back to the world of the living. The burial of a king was an important part of the succession. Politically, it formalized the transition, tying up loose ends between one reign and the next. Religiously, the ceremony had an important meaning. It evoked the death of Usir, Osiris, and how his son Heru, Horus, had buried him, so any ruler should conduct the funeral rites for their predecessor, whether it was their actual father or not. As the current avatar of kingship, Ramesses must have led these rites for Seti. The tomb was hidden, the dust settled. Seti went to his rest. Now the succession was almost complete. Ramesses had performed the proper rites of a son for the father. There was just one more phase in the great transition of power. It was time for Ramesses to meet the gods. The names were established, the Osiris was buried. Now it was time for one last step, or rather several. Ramesses should appear before the gods. On the walls of temples, like Karnak, Ramesses II left images of himself before the deities, great beings like Amun-Ra, Mut and Khonsu, the rulers of Waset, Sekhmet, the lady of war, Montu, the battle falcon, Jehuti, or Thoth, the master of writing and record-keeping, Heru, or Horus, the embodiment of kingship itself, and many others besides. In these images, Ramesses makes offerings to the beings who order the universe. In return, the gods bless Ramesses, consecrate his rule, and promise him long life. Now, do these images convey actual physical ceremonies, rituals with priests and priestesses? That is a thorny question. In the past, I have described it in those terms, but recently, the idea of a coronation, quote-unquote, is undergoing a revision in the scholarship. I won't get into it right now, but long story short, the ancients never described the coronation ceremony as a single event in a particular place. There are images of the king before the gods who appear to bless, even empower, his insignia and crowns. But historically, scholars have looked at these images through a particularly European lens. Think Charlemagne before Pope Leo, Elizabeth II before the Archbishop of Canterbury. These older models have informed how many historians understood the ancient Egyptian rites. But of course, ancient Egypt was not a monotheistic society, with one god or one priesthood. So the idea that Ramesses went to one place and received his crowns from any earthly authority, that is undergoing revision and debate. It's still in progress. I can't give you a brand new version of the event right now, but what I can do is focus on some ideas, some motifs that Ramesses himself presented in art. So, in short, we're going back to basics, to the way that Ramesses depicted these offerings and the blessings he received. To view them, we have to visit Karnak. On the walls of Karnak Temple, specifically the grand hypostyle hall built by Seti I, young Ramesses added images of himself with the gods. There are dozens of these scenes, dealing with offerings, prayers, blessings, and so forth. Among the dizzying array of imagery, though, there are several that might relate to the crowning, or at least the accession, of Ramesses II. I've chosen 4 that I think are evocative and distinctive. We open with an image that, at least in this case, might have physically occurred at the temple. It shows Ramesses wearing the red crown of northern Egypt and running in front of a god. The king clutches a flail and a small scepter called the mekes, and he runs in front of the deity Montu. Montu, or Menchu, the wanderer, is a human male with a falcon's head and a tall crown made of a sun disk and ostrich feathers. He is one of the lords of the city of Waset, Thebes, or Luxor. In fact, the temple of Montu is located in the northern part of Karnak. So there's a decent chance that Ramesses performed this scene right near to Montu's temple. The point of the running is to demonstrate strength and endurance, and the king's physical ability to rule. It is a ceremony that takes place repeatedly throughout a king's reign, especially during the Sed festival, when a king might run around the perimeter of a temple or a courtyard in its sanctuary. Wherever he did it, the point was to show power, physical power, and the health and well-being of the ruler. So Ramesses shows himself doing this before Montu, and maybe it actually happened at his temple. Above the king, hieroglyphs tell us why Ramesses should do this, and even how many times he should run. Quote, traversing the field 4 times for his father Montu, the lord of Waset, so that he, Ramesses, might achieve the state of given life. Montu, the lord of Waset, says to Ramesses, I have given to you the lifetime of Ra. I have given to you the years of Atum. I have given to you my strength against all foreign countries. I have given you the victories of my sword, my strength, and my power. I have given to you the victories of my sword in order to trample the rebellious foreign lands. End quote. Ramesses wanted to live long and rule with strength. Montu, like other deities, could give him that power in a supernatural and physical sense. And the war god, in particular, was a good friend to have. Ramesses was young, and he intended to lead military expeditions. Honoring Montu and receiving his strength, that would give him victory in war. The image at Karnak communicates the idea of this relationship. The king performs his physical deed to show his worthiness before the deity. In return, Montu promises him victory. Whether Ramesses physically did this, that's a matter for the academics, or your imagination. But the scene is evocative, and a good start to the tale. After his running, you can imagine that Ramesses might be a bit sweaty. Good thing then that the gods were ready to purify him. The next scene I'll highlight shows the king standing between 2 deities. On his left, Heru, or Horus, and on his right, Jehuti, or Thoth. The gods reach up, holding vases, and they pour streams of water over the king. The water appears as symbols, specifically the Ankh, meaning life, and the Was, meaning dominion or power. Ramesses wears a long straight beard, and his name appears here in its early form, Usr Ma'at Ra. So this scene must have been carved in year 1, when he was fresh and new to rule. As Ramesses enjoys his shower, the gods speak to him. Horus says, quote, I have purified you, Ramesses, with life and dominion, Ankh and Was, so that your limbs may be rejuvenated forever. Power and victory belong to your strong arm. May your name endure like the names of Shu and Tefnut. May you be young like Khepri, as Ra endures in his rising and setting. For your person is the Lord of the Black Land, Kemet. Meanwhile, Jehuti, or Thoth, also speaks to Ramesses, and he says, quote, your purity, Ramesses, is that of Horus, and his purity is yours. Your purity is that of Seth, and his is yours. Be pure, O king, lord of the 2 lands, master of strength, Usr Ma'at Ra. You shall live continually, and be foremost of the Ka spirits, of the living. You will appear on the throne of Horus forever. End quote. Again, we can only speculate whether this was a physical ritual conducted by priests representing the gods, or whether the art itself on the walls of the temple conveys the image and magically makes the purification happen. Either way, the relationship between Ramesses and these deities is clear. Horus, lord of kingship, and Jehuti, master of record-keeping, present Ramesses as a pure, sacred being. They promise him power, long life, and an endless reign upon the throne that belongs to Horus. With the waters of life and dominion, the king is purified, anointed, and empowered with the waters they pour upon him. Again, a good start to the reign. Now, in the third scene, we do have an image that might reflect a coronation of sorts. Ramesses sits upon his throne, clutching the crook and flail, the traditional scepters of kingship. Upon his head he wears the double crown, the red crown of the north and the white crown of the south. The king is flanked by two goddesses, who also sit upon thrones to either side. One is Nekhbet, the vulture, and the other is Wadjet, the cobra. These two ladies are the patron goddesses of the two lands, so their presence visually communicates the king's rule over all Egypt. The goddesses reach out to embrace the king. They have one hand under each of his elbows, and their other hand rests on each of his shoulders. So visually, Ramesses is embraced and presented by these patron goddesses. To either side of this image, Horus and Jehuti appear once more. The gods are striding forward, almost running, and they reach out with one hand to present the crowns, the white and the red, in front of Ramesses. With the other hand, they reach up to touch the crowns that are upon the king's head. At a glance, it's not entirely clear if the gods are placing those crowns there, or if they are simply blessing or anointing them. Fortunately, hieroglyphs describe the significance. Quote, "Words spoken by Jehuti, the master of divine words. He says, 'O my bodily son, whom I love, the master of strength, Ramesses, beloved of Amun, I establish for you the double crown upon your head, in order that you take possession of the two lands by your rightful inheritance. May every foreign land be gathered in your grasp, and may you be rejuvenated like Ra." End quote. So Jehuti establishes the double crown upon the king's head. Horus does the same. Quote, "Words spoken by Horus of Edfu. He says, I establish for you the crown of southern Egypt and the crown of northern Egypt, they being established upon your brow. You appear as Horus, lord of the palace, after you have gone forth with the white crown on your head, and you having come into existence as one who takes possession of the double crown. You are lord of the two lands, User Ma'at Ra." End quote. Again, the scene has the early form of Ramesses' name, so it belongs to year 1. And whether we read this literally as an actual rite performed by priests, or metaphorically, royal power deriving from the gods, it communicates the idea. Beloved of the deities, Ramesses is strengthened by their embrace. He succeeds to power through his natural and divine inheritance, and his right to rule is embraced and strengthened by the gods. Finally, there is one more scene I'd like to emphasize. It is a large one with 2 sections. On the right, Ramesses kneels in front of the god Amun-Ra, who sits upon a throne. There is also Mut, the mother, and Khonsu, their child. The king is clad in his regalia, including the blue crown, and he holds the crook and flail in one hand. In the other hand, Ramesses reaches out to receive a gift from Amun, and it is one heck of a gift. Amun-Ra offers Ramesses a symbol, a small shrine with 2 chairs inside, atop a semicircle. This symbol is the hieroglyph Heb Sed, or Sed Festival, which is the grand jubilee that a monarch celebrated after 30 years of rule, and then every few years afterwards. To offer a Heb Sed effectively means that the god promises a long life and a long tenure for the king. In this case, Amun-Ra makes his wishes clear. Quote, "Words spoken by Amun-Ra, the lord of the thrones of the two lands. He says, O my beloved son, the lord of the two lands, Ramesses, receive for yourself the crook and the flail, receive years, and receive myriads of Heb-Sed festivals, you appearing as the king of southern and northern Egypt." End quote. In other words, Amun-Ra promises Ramesses longevity and a great duration as the reigning monarch. Notably, the goddess Mut also offers these festivals, and she in turn speaks to the king, saying, quote, "Words spoken by Mut, the lady of Isheru. She says, I have made your heart endure in the great place, in the presence of your father, the Lord of the gods, Amun. His heart is joyful through love of you. As he endures, your limbs endure with life and dominion, just like Ra forever." End quote. So the father and the mother together promise Ramesses a long life, especially in the form of said festivals. The god's gift, symbolic or otherwise, did turn out to be startlingly effective. Ramesses would celebrate a said festival in the 30th year of his rule. Then he would celebrate another, and another, and another, and another, and another, and you get the point. In the coming years, Ramesses would hold 13 said festivals, the first in year 30, and then every 3 to 4 years after. A staggering achievement, a record in terms of documented said festivals, and a grand testament to the love that the gods had given him. Behind Ramesses, the god Jehuti, or Thoth, watches this event. He clutches a pen, since he's the lord of scribes, and he makes a record of the event. Jehuti also speaks about Ramesses' reign and future. Quote, "Words spoken by Jehuti, the lord of Chemenu, or Hermopolis. Behold, I am acting in accordance with that which has been ordained by your father, the Lord of the gods, Amun. I, Jehuti, have caused your year records to be established, consisting of millions of years and multitudes of said festivals. And I have caused your lifetime to be like that of the sky. So long as Ra exists, so shall you exist. I have given to you the southerners who are gathered in submission, the northerners who are subdued by your divine power. I have placed the terror of you in all foreign countries, and the dread of you in the hearts of their chiefs." End quote. Lest we forget, Jehuti or Thoth might be a scribe and accountant, but he has a violent side. And like other gods, Jehuti promises victory over foreigners, their submission to the power of the pharaoh. Again, Ramesses was young and had ambitious plans in the military sphere. The support of Jehuti might not be an obvious one today, but he was a good god to have on your side. Finally, the left part of the scene shows something interesting. A series of deities seated together in rows. There are 15 of these gods, each holding their scepters and watching the event. This group is the Ennead, the divine council who have authority over the universe. It includes deities like Montu, Atum, the complete one, Shu, the air and light, Tefnut, moisture, Usir, or Osiris, Aset, or Isis, and Seth, but he is called the one of Nebu, or Ombos, instead of his name. We also have Nephthys, Horus, Hathor, and more. A real party of the great and powerful. The Ennead watches Ramesses as he kneels before Amun-Ra, and they speak collectively for the benefit of the king. Quote, "Words spoken by the great Ennead who reside in Ipet Sut, Karnak. They say, one acts in accordance with all that you, Amun-Ra, have ordained for your son who came forth in front of you. As for the son, we have given to the king millions of years and multitudes of said festivals, as one should do for a son who is as effective as he." End quote. A human male stands before the Ennead, and he reaches out in greeting. He wears a distinctive costume, a leopard skin wrapped around his torso, a short beard like a goatee, and a wig with a thick braid or sidelock down the side. This is the Horus Iyun Mutef, Horus the pillar of his mother. He is the avatar of transition, and he shows up here to mark the appearance of a new king. It's an important image, emphasizing the passing of one regime to the next. The Yun-Mutef speaks and describes this transition. Quote, "Words spoken by the Yun-Mutef, the purifier of the Perwer shrine, to the great Ennead which is in Ipet Sut, or Karnak. He says, Amun-Ra, king of the gods, has decreed the establishing of the son whom he loves, Ramesses, as the king of southern and northern Egypt. He has given to him south, north, west, and east gathered together. The flatlands and the hill countries are underneath his sandals, and his arm is not opposed. This is spoken in Iyunu, Heliopolis. It is done in Waset, or Thebes, and it endures in the mansion of the Ka of Ptah, that is, Memphis." End quote. So Ramesses receives the four corners of the earth, and this is done in multiple temples throughout the land. His power is established by all the gods, both the creators and the divine council. Ramesses receives life, dominions, crowns, and longevity from the great and powerful gods. They come individually and in groups to bless the ruler and oversee the transition. These are just 4 scenes that appear at Karnak specifically. There are more that I could have described with variations on these themes, but unlike Ramesses, we do not have endless years ahead. For now, I hope this introduction gives a taste of the scenery. If you'd like to learn more about these images, the Hypostyle Hall has been published in drawings, photographs, translations, and commentary, and all of these are available completely free through the University of Chicago. I'll put a link in the episode description if you would like to access them. Now, as I said, the coronation, quote-unquote, is currently being revisited and revised by scholars. One thing that's important to remember: the scenes I just described come from Karnak, but as we saw with the Yun-Mutef, there are references to other temples like Iyunu, Heliopolis, and the mansion of the Ka of Ptah, that is He-Kupta, or Memphis. Unfortunately, those other great temples are almost entirely destroyed, only fragments remain, so we don't know how much of the Karnak imagery would have been replicated in these other sanctuaries. There are bits and pieces which suggest Ramesses did include such scenes in other temples, and with that in mind, it's probably safe to assume that Ramesses did not perform these rituals just once at a single temple. Instead, he probably did it multiple times, maybe with variations depending on the place. He could have gone to each of the major sanctuaries and visited the gods of those regions to receive their blessings, for them to confirm his authority, and, as always, receive promises of life. For now, we can only speculate on that. But with so many blessings, it's no wonder the king lived as long as he did. In 1292 BCE, Ramesses II appeared as king of Egypt. He buried his father, Seti, in the Valley of the Kings, performing the duty of a pious son, Horus, for his father, Osiris. Ramesses chose and announced his names, most notably Usur Ma'at Ra, the order of Ra is powerful, and Ramesses, beloved of Amun. Then, the king visited the temples to receive blessings and confirmation from the great and powerful gods. With those 3 steps, the succession was complete, the time of transition ended, and the reign began in earnest. Ramesses was pharaoh. The History of Egypt podcast is supported by you, the listeners, in particular, those who have subscribed to the show on patreon.com. I would especially like to thank the priests, my top-tier supporters, who give most generously every month. Special thanks must go to Chris, James, Dan, Si Yen, Karen, Jeanne, Jeffrey, James, Veronica, Ashley, Neden, Andy and Chelsea, Mycost, Yola, TJ, Terry, Eric, and Linda. Folks, you are all too kind. May you receive millions of said festivals, and may your duration be like that of Ra. I would also like to thank those who have recently joined as hereditary nobles and overseers. Folks like Patrick, Allison, and Suyon, who became nobles in early 2025, and Andre, James, Jessica, John, Rachel, Jerry, and Jen, who became overseers in the same period. Folks, thank you for your support. I hope you enjoy your stay, and may you too receive a long life and reign, like that of Amun-Ra. To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining me. Take care, and may the great deities bless and keep you. I'll see you soon.